Today we're going to revisit what happened to the sons of Jacob. You're familiar with Joseph. He was favored by his father, and that led to extreme jealousy on the part of his brothers. So much so, they toyed with the idea of simply killing him. So they threw him down into a pit until they could figure out what to do. And of course, they ended up selling him into slavery, and for all they know, he'll end up dying as a slave. So when you first went through the book of Genesis, you might have figured that God would send a redeemer through one of the sons of Jacob, and the seemingly obvious choice would be Joseph. And you'd probably be justified in thinking that, as the Bible starts to show you one son of Jacob failing right after the other. Let's start with Reuben. He's the firstborn, and he fails by sleeping with one of his father's wives. I'm not too sure how brother Dan and Naphtali felt about that. So God's probably going to move on to Simeon. But Simeon and his brother Levi use God's institution of circumcision to make a whole city incapable of defending themselves, as Simeon and Levi kill all the males in the town. This takes care of Simeon and Levi. God's not going to let the Redeemer be born into their lineage. Things are starting to look good for Joseph to be in the front running of consideration. We have a verse in Genesis 37 that tells us when Joseph would see some of his brothers doing something sinful, that he would report that to his father Jacob. So the other brothers didn't like him for that, as well as God giving Joseph dreams about him ruling over the whole family. Even later on, Jacob sends Joseph to go see what his brothers are up to, and this was finally the last straw. The brothers grab him and sell him as a slave. His brothers were probably up to no good, and more than likely Joseph often had plenty of wild stories to report back to his father. Now, I'm not one to tell you if you are too young to get married. I can give you my opinion, but you have to make your own decisions on the circumstances that God has allowed you to be in. And don't get into a marriage without praying about it. I'm going to guess that Judah got married to a Canaanite woman at around age 15. He also permitted his sons to get married at young ages as well. Judah does not appear to be bothered that the Canaanites are under a curse way back in Genesis chapter 9. Now, before you tell me that Judah wouldn't know about that because they didn't have a copy of Genesis, because, well, it wasn't written at this time, I realize that. And I know that they didn't have the same Bible that you and I have, but even though they didn't have a full copy of Genesis, we believe at this point in time they knew about the first 11 chapters that were probably passed down from generation to generation, as well as their most recent example of their great-grandfather Abraham not wanting his son Isaac to marry a nearby girl, but sent back to his home country for a suitable wife. And also, their grandfather Isaac didn't want their own father Jacob to have a Canaanite wife. But the days get long and sort of drag when you're tending sheep, and those nearby Canaanite girls sure do look good, so Judah starts messing around with them at a young age. Perhaps it was this sort of activity that gave Joseph a lot of subject matter to report back to father about. But Judah would do a Fred McMurray impersonation and have 3 sons, and their names were Onan, and Shelah. And Judah decides to arrange a marriage for his son And so marries a girl named Tamar. And now the book of Genesis is getting ready for yet another first. We've had the first man and woman, the first murderer, the first rain, the first rainbow, and the list goes on, but now we have the first time in Scripture where God kills an individual. Oh, sure, there was the worldwide flood where numerous people died in one judgment, but was so evil that God kills him all by his lonesome. So Judah feels honor bound to give his second son, Onan, to Tamar, because the first son hadn't produced any children. And I'm guessing that Onan, being younger than his brother would be more juvenile than his brother. Onan was given to Tamar because at that time it was customary for a brother to help out the widow of his dead brother if the first brother hadn't produced any children. This comes from the dispensation that we now call human government. Men's conscience would dictate to them what was right and wrong, and many of these rules and regulations carried on even into the Mosaic Law. And God honored them. So much so that when Onan refused to give Tamar any children, and even taunted her with this predicament, that God struck down and killed Onan. This really makes Judah look bad. He's raised two sons that were so wicked and evil that God killed both of them. Judah is not likely to win any Father of the Year awards anytime soon. And now he's got a big problem on his hands. He's done such a lousy job of raising his family that if he gives his third son to Tamar, he figures it would only be a matter of time before God kills him also. So he refuses to give the third son in marriage and uses the excuse that his son is too young for marriage. Tamar must accept this temporary setback, but she probably started to feel the shame of her culture that more than likely gossiped behind her back for having two husbands and yet still no children. After some time goes by, Judah's wife dies, so it's obvious that there's not going to be a fourth son born to Judah. Had there been a fourth son, then maybe Judah would have gambled that it would now be safe to risk giving Shelah to Tamar in marriage, but he continues to delay. So Tamar takes matters into her own hand. She covers her face as to not be recognized, and she goes to where Judah will be. Judah notices her and thinks to himself, well, I no longer have a wife. Maybe I should spend the night with this harlot. And so he does. But Tamar keeps her identity a secret, and she becomes pregnant. Judah leaves some of his belongings behind as proof that he'll return with full payment for this transaction. But when he returns to pay her and to get back his belongings, she is gone. And as the days go by, some of the women start to notice that Tamar is looking a bit different, and they suspect that she has been running around and has gotten pregnant. When Judah hears about this, he sends for her, and boy, is he ever going to read her the riot act. He's all set to be judge and jury in this matter. He might even let young Shelah attend this courtroom proceeding. But Tamar introduces new evidence to the court when she produces the personal belongings of Judah and declares that he's the father. I suppose this would have been one of those daytime television shows with the paternity DNA test results, which does prove one thing, that there's nothing new under the sun. Judah takes responsibility, and maybe now he's going to be a better man. In a bizarre twist of fate, the two sons of Judah that died without giving Tamar any children get represented by their own father, Judah. Tamar's pregnancy turns out to be twins. So in effect, Judah raises up children on behalf of his two dead sons because he wouldn't allow his third son to perform this duty. This account of Judah having all kinds of sexual sins is told to us right in the middle of the narrative about Joseph. And it's quite the contrast, as Joseph is avoiding these situations, even though it's costing him a lot of personal hardships and prison time. And you know the basics of this already. Joseph's brothers are going to come down to Egypt looking for food. Well, his brothers come down all except Benjamin. Benjamin was the only full brother that Joseph had from their mother Rachel. And Father Jacob wouldn't risk letting Benjamin go anywhere. So when the brothers show up, Joseph recognizes them, but doesn't let on that he's their brother. Joseph at this time would look like any other clean-shaven Egyptian who speaks to them through an interpreter. And the brothers have assumed that Joseph has been long dead by now. Joseph doesn't really know if his little brother Benjamin is truly still alive. And for that matter, he doesn't even know if his father is still alive. And you know that they agree to bring Benjamin on their second trip to Egypt, and Joseph arranges to feed them. And when he does, he has his servants sit them according to their birth order. And he has the servants give Benjamin 5 times as much food. This comes in handy when you want to see if your brothers are still envious because he and Benjamin were preferred by their father Jacob. But they don't pay it much attention. And Joseph gives them yet another test. He wants to see if they will abandon their brother Benjamin like they abandoned him. So he tells them that they can leave, but they have to leave behind Benjamin, as Benjamin must now be a slave. And this news tears up the brothers. They know that this will surely kill their father. But it's Judah that steps forward and begins to plead with Joseph. And when he gets done relating everything to Joseph, he finally does something that is truly noble. He offers himself as a slave so that Benjamin can go free. It's taken many years for Judah to grow up and stop making selfish decisions to satisfy his flesh and his pride. And of course, you know the rest of the story. But God didn't forget Judah after he offered himself sacrificially instead of Benjamin. God allowed Judah to be the one tribe of Israel that would lead to the Messiah, Jesus. In your first reading of this story, you probably thought that it was going to be Joseph that would receive that kind of honor. And it wasn't just God that noticed Judah had come a long way by offering himself in Benjamin's place. The descendants of Benjamin must have taken notice as well. For when the Israelites settle in their land, it's the Benjamites that stick close to the tribe of Judah. And later, when the 10 northern tribes separate, it's the tribe of Benjamin that stays with Judah. So much so that during that separation, the 10 northern tribes are referred to as plainly Israel, while Benjamin and Judah are just referred to as Judah. And this is where the first 2 kings would come from. King Saul was from Benjamin, and King David was from Judah. And that's the historical part of it. But let's put a spiritual application on this for those of us living in the here and now. There have been many people before you that have failed. And just when it seems like you are next in line for failure, there is still time to sacrifice yourself like Judah did. Did you sacrifice your so-called rights? Did you sacrifice your pride, your fleshly desires, and even your reputation? Are you prepared to give up everything, including your freedom, to be your own boss? If that's what it takes to be a true Christian, then what are you waiting for? Surrender your life to Him before you get passed by.